Tonight on 24, Trump's contradictory and confusing messages amidst war and peace scenarios with the Islamic Republic. Trump says if Iran doesn't accept a deal, it'll be bombed, and delivering enriched uranium is also part of this deal. In Iran, media close to the IRGC say America's one-page plan contains unacceptable clauses. Ghalibaf says the possibility of military attacks and terrorist attacks isn't low. France's new steps to restore shipping security in the Persian Gulf. France's aircraft carrier group has headed to the region. Macron has asked Tehran for the Strait of Hormuz to be immediately reopened.
From the Iran International Studio, this is 24 with Fardad Farajad.
Viewers of Iran International in Iran and around the world, hello and good evening. The U.S. president says the delivery of enriched uranium and the suspension of some nuclear activities in Iran are part of the deal currently under review. Donald Trump told PBS that if Tehran accepts these demands, some of the Islamic Republic's sanctions will be lifted. Just an hour ago, Trump also wrote on Truth Social that if Tehran doesn't accept a deal, bombing will resume. But if there's a deal, the Strait of Hormuz will remain open for all countries, including Iran. My colleague Samira Garai is with us from the White House. Samira, this roller coaster of Mr. Trump's statements seems to have no end. Contradictory statements. One day talking about war, the next about negotiations or peace. It is really difficult to figure out exactly where we are headed for analysts, journalists, and naturally the millions of Iranians anxiously following the situation.
Exactly. It's a roller coaster that has its ups and downs every moment. A report comes out, news comes out, and 2 hours later, that news has completely, totally lost its meaning and concept. Yesterday here at Mr. Ruby's press conference, he came and spoke for an hour about Project Freedom. Earlier in the morning at the Pentagon, the Secretary of War delivered a speech regarding the ongoing initiatives of Project Freedom. However, just a few hours later, Mr. Trump unexpectedly intervened and temporarily paused the operation. His goal in halting it for a short while was to determine whether he could successfully negotiate a diplomatic deal with the Islamic Republic. We are currently navigating such a complex situation, and various sources too, Fardad, are each providing completely different and often conflicting statements. Just this morning, for instance, in a detailed report published by Axios, we read from Barak Ravid that there is a distinct possibility of signing a memorandum of understanding within the next 48 hours. Barak Ravid was just here at the White House, and I was talking to him. He was saying that different sources are each saying different things, meaning from every angle you look, there is a possibility. There's a possibility of an attack. There's a possibility of a deal. We're in such an atmosphere. Mr. Trump himself today had a conversation with PBS and also spoke in the presence of mothers of U.S. service members or women who themselves serve in the U.S. military. He spoke in their presence. He also spoke about the Islamic Republic and about how they want a deal. They are pursuing a deal. The United States is also pursuing a deal. And again, he repeated those statements like before, about the Islamic Republic being destroyed. Air forces, naval forces, radars, defense systems. Now, if I go back to his conversation with PBS, because that was more important than the speech he gave, it had important points. If I go back to that, he said that he's optimistic and he sees that a deal might happen with the Islamic Republic. He feels it, but he had felt that way before too, and it hadn't happened. So now we'll have to see what happens. In the sections related to nuclear issues, we know that Mr. Trump, or at least the Trump administration, has this message that the entirety of the Epic Rage operation and the war started because of nuclear issues. In the nuclear field, Axios this morning came and pointed to issues where that one-page memorandum of understanding has 14 articles. In those 14 articles, parts of it are about nuclear discussions. One of them is what will happen to that enriched uranium that's now in Isfahan if we're talking about 60% enriched. In this report that Axios provided, it says that it will be removed from Iran. Mr. Trump tells PBS that there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This uranium will be transferred to the United States. Regarding the suspension of enrichment, if I want to mention that, the Islamic Republic wants to not enrich for 5 years. America says 20 years. The numbers 12 and 15 have also been brought up in between. And after that, Axios says the Islamic Republic can enrich to 3.67%. They asked Trump, they say it's not like that. But then he goes on to say, well, this figure, it's a negligible figure, not very big at all. But overall, Mr. Trump has an optimism regarding a deal. Let's go hear some parts of his speech that he gave right here among these mothers of military personnel.
We are doing really well in Iran right now. Everything is going very smoothly, and we will see what happens in the coming days. They desperately want to reach a formal agreement, and they want to sit down to negotiate. We currently have the biggest, best equipped army we have ever had. Without a doubt, we have the strongest and most capable army in the entire world. We are never going to let Iran have nuclear weapons, under any circumstances. We are dealing with people who really want to reach an agreement, and we will see if they can offer a deal that is fully satisfactory for us or not. The situation is completely under our control. The economic blockade is really fantastic. The Navy has done an amazing job. What they've done is like a steel wall that no one can get through, especially the Iranians. They can't get anything through from any direction, so they're practically out of commission. We'll see if they agree or not, and if they don't agree, they'll be forced to agree very soon after. That's just how it is.
Fardad, we're on the verge of Mr. Trump's trip to Beijing, and many analysts believe that Mr. Trump wants to wrap up this war before he goes to meet with Xi Jinping. He wants the Strait of Hormuz to be open. China benefits a lot from the Strait of Hormuz issue. Most of the oil it consumes, it receives through the Strait of Hormuz, meaning it has to pass through there. Analysts say that because of this issue, he wants to reach a peace now, or at least create an understanding, rather than wanting to escalate tensions further. And he himself, in talks he had with PBS, says that he hopes our discussion about these secondary sanctions and the Strait of Hormuz and all that won't be with Xi Jinping, meaning he hopes all of this will have been resolved by then. So today, the discussion is about a 14-point memorandum of understanding. It's not clear. Americans think they'll get such a response from the Iranians, but regarding Israel, several news reports came out today about what they think. As someone who started the Wrath of Senses operation alongside the United States, Mr. Netanyahu has said that he knows Mr. Trump will respect the nuclear red line. And on the other hand, he also mentions that he will have a phone conversation with Mr. Trump. Although Trump and Netanyahu talking on the phone isn't big news, and they pretty much talk on the phone every day, Fardad.
Thank you. My colleague, Samira Garai, is with us from the White House. Amin Sufyamar, an international relations expert and lecturer at the University of Central Oklahoma, has also joined us from this very state. Mr. Sufyamar, with so many contradictory statements and so much ambiguity from the U.S. president, is this still the art of the deal, or is it a fallacy without a clear picture of its end?
Greetings to you and dear compatriots. Look, Trump has a strategy, and that is that his enemies shouldn't be able to read his mind, and he always keeps the situation in a strategic ambiguity. That's why many have said that the only person who can make a decision in this regard and knows what's going on in his mind is Trump himself. And we might even jokingly say that even Trump himself doesn't know what's going on in his mind. But still, if we consider the trend, the demands Trump has from the Islamic Republic are not things the Islamic Republic can fulfill. Fundamentally, the Islamic Republic and Trump have irreconcilable demands and expectations. After the Islamic Republic's missile forces and regional proxy capabilities have been severely damaged, and it is now suffering under a strict naval blockade, the regime considers it more essential than anything else to maintain its nuclear capability for its own ultimate security. It knows that if it hands over its nuclear capability, particularly that stockpile of 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, to the Trump administration, a devastating situation much like Libya will inevitably arise, where it gets completely disarmed and left defenseless, At that vulnerable point, the Islamic Republic deeply fears that Israel might seize the opportunity to permanently finish off the regime. Therefore, the opposing security imperatives of both sides do not allow for an agreement. On the other hand, if Donald Trump ultimately agrees to a suspension of uranium enrichment, accepting something in the form and shape of the JCPOA, then he will essentially enter into a so-called agreement with the Islamic Republic, the exact kind he used to vehemently criticize Barack Obama for. Consequently, Trump cannot retreat indefinitely without facing severe political backlash, and the Islamic Republic cannot retreat either. Therefore, the possibility of a diplomatic agreement, unless something truly extraordinary happens, is still extremely slim.
But it seems Tehran isn't exactly empty-handed, is it? For example, that operation to free the Iranian ship in the Strait of Hormuz didn't even last 24 hours after Tehran's attacks on the United Arab Emirates.
President Trump himself intentionally halted this military operation, perhaps because he wants to give diplomatic negotiations another realistic chance. However, America undoubtedly possesses the overwhelming military capability required for such action. The United States can easily pivot back to direct military operations at any moment, which is a scenario the Islamic Republic wishes to avoid. Therefore, the Islamic Republic desperately aims to secure a binding deal where America formally commits that these military strikes will not happen anymore. Consequently, the Islamic Republic doesn't really have strong leverage either. On the other hand, if we truly want to understand Trump's mindset regarding the Islamic Republic, it is that Trump firmly believes the Islamic Republic has already been militarily defeated. He has publicly said many times that they have absolutely no viable cards left to play. Consequently, the Islamic Republic has no choice but to surrender to his terms. In one of his recent interviews, Trump declared, "I don't want 95% of the conditions. I want 100% of them." Why? Because the Islamic Republic has no leverageable card to play. Ultimately, this reflects the core of Trump's deal-making mindset. So, if the leadership of the Islamic Republic wants to remain stubbornly defiant, Donald Trump firmly thinks there is absolutely no other viable way forward for him but to continue the strategic operations. A comprehensive naval blockade is simply not something the heavily sanctioned Islamic Republic can endure for a long time. In fact, it was reported that senior government officials and doctors had warned that the Islamic Republic's fragile economy could only last for something like 4, 6, or 8 weeks. Right now, something like 1 million barrels of oil have been effectively cut daily from the Islamic Republic's vital exports, and now the so-called reserves of oil and fossil fuels there are becoming severely depleted. Because of this, the Islamic Republic can't even extract adequate resources, and it is actively forced to block several aging oil wells. So, in my opinion, the steady passage of time is ultimately much more to the severe detriment of the Islamic Republic than to Donald Trump.
Thank you, Amin Soufimer, international relations expert and lecturer at the University of Central Oklahoma.
Thank you.
In Tehran, some media outlets close to the IRGC say that despite reports published in the media about the Islamic Republic and the U.S. nearing an agreement, the latest White House proposal contains some unacceptable clauses, and the Iranian government has not yet given an official response to it. Meanwhile, Esmail Baghai, spokesperson for the Islamic Republic's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said the U.S. proposal is still under review. Ruhollah Rahimpur, journalist and political analyst, has also joined us. Mr. Rahimpur, it seems that the statements of Islamic Republic officials have more coherence than the American side, don't they? At least it doesn't seem like they've made any significant changes in what they've said from the beginning until now, at least in practice. Now, if they're saying something else to the Americans in private, we don't know.
Greetings to you, Mr. Farestad, and also to our esteemed viewers joining us today. I think one of the main reasons that has made the current geopolitical situation so incredibly unstable in the region is the stark division between words and actions within the Islamic Republic. Certainly, what you're saying is completely correct. Most of the statements the Islamic Republic is making, whether from top military officials or key political leaders, are mostly indicating one specific thing. But if this coherence were to actually exist in practice, then naturally a tangible opening should have been created in the complex path of negotiations, and viable possibilities should have been provided in the path of finding a diplomatic solution for broader conditions to improve. Unfortunately, this simply hasn't happened. Of course, in this highly sensitive matter, naturally, the shifting demands and actions of the Americans are also effective and, in fact, deeply involved in the current stalemate. But if the Islamic Republic were to pursue a specific issue with genuine coherence, then then naturally, through the various initiatives and creativities that are considered in diplomacy, they could have successfully created a viable solution to break the deadlock. Consequently, contrary to what frequently appears to be unified statements or a perfectly unified outlook presented across the official platforms of the Islamic Republic, fundamentally, in actual practice, whether during active diplomatic negotiations or throughout delicate pre-negotiation processes, that projected coherence simply does not exist. Right now, there are numerous credible reports indicating serious, deep-seated disagreements among the members of the Supreme National Security Council. These internal fractures revolve around the very essence of negotiations, the specific content being discussed, and the procedural form of the talks, which naturally they try desperately not to reveal to the public. As a result, from the platform of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or sometimes military platforms, assertive points are raised that mostly also have domestic customers. This means they directly serve domestic consumption, but in actual negotiations, these actors behave quite differently. That frustrating deadlock that often happens in negotiations is clearly because of this contradiction. I mean, on one hand, there is a serious political cost domestically if leaders appear weak, and on the other hand, there are practical exigencies that create strict necessities in diplomacy. This conflicting pressure causes deep division and sometimes creates a prolonged stalemate in the diplomatic process.
But the fact that they don't show any flexibility or potential for change doesn't make things difficult because, for example, this issue of transferring Iran's enriched uranium is something that in the Iranian side's view, they've completely dug their heels in and say they're not willing to hand it over under any circumstances. If standing so firm on one point doesn't make it difficult to reach a potential agreement, which, as Mr. Trump says, isn't possible without handing over these uraniums.
Oh, absolutely it does. Makes things difficult, just like it's already made things more difficult up until now, you know? Of course, there isn't an absolute situation. It's possible that the Islamic Republic might achieve something at some point that could serve as a suitable equivalent for, say, these kinds of red lines. In diplomacy, too, we don't have fixed red lines, or rather, there are no absolute red lines, especially since the Islamic Republic, both on the ground and in diplomacy, of course, holds the weaker hand, whether militarily or in terms of its international standing. It has a lower position. Consequently, its red lines shouldn't, as a rule, tend towards being absolute. Just a little while ago, they were insisting that we absolutely must have enrichment, but now they've accepted that enrichment should be suspended, that it should be put on hold. They're having disagreements with the Americans over the timeline, meaning they've accepted the principle of stopping enrichment. As a rule, they can accept other red lines too, provided that if the conditions were equal, then they would go for an equal equivalent. If they could get an equal equivalent, they would even give up on that. But in exceptional situations, you might not always be able to get an equal equivalent, meaning you simply cannot achieve a gain. Instead, your main issue might be about minimizing inevitable loss, meaning you do something proactively so you do not have to pay a much higher cost. The precarious situation the Islamic Republic is currently in, where a devastating war could restart at any moment and happen with more destructive and widespread consequences, will, in my opinion, lead to these historical red lines being placed against suitable exigencies instead of strict equality. Subsequently, they might even deviate from this approach, or they might even completely retreat from this.
Thank you, Ruhollah Rahimi-Kaur, journalist and analyst. An hour ago, coinciding with the end of the Security Council's closed-door meeting on the Middle East crisis, the permanent mission of the Islamic Republic to the United Nations accused the U.S. of obstructing the path to resolving the crisis and called the proposed draft resolution at its session flawed and influenced by political motives. This meeting was held at the request of Bahrain and following Iran's attacks on Persian Gulf countries and the escalation of tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. Representatives of Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, prior to this meeting, called for a decisive response from the international community to resolve this issue and accused Tehran of blackmailing the global economy.
Such reckless and aggressive actions pose a deeply serious threat to broader global peace and enduring stability. Furthermore, these rising tensions and their unwarranted escalation significantly undermine ongoing diplomatic efforts and delicate negotiating processes that aim to restore much-needed regional stability. The Kingdom of Bahrain expresses its unwavering solidarity with the United Arab Emirates and fiercely condemns these hostile attacks. The fundamental importance of regional security is unquestionable, and these dangerous attacks must be stopped explicitly and immediately. Consequently, these brazen attacks require a crushing, unified, and decisive response from the international community, specifically demanding immediate action from the United Nations Security Council to ensure global order.
Mariam Rahmati, our correspondent, has just joined us live from the United Nations headquarters. Mariam, as we know, the Persian Gulf countries have tried in various ways several times at the UN to pass a firm resolution against Iran's regional actions. However, they've more or less consistently faced strong opposition from the Russian Federation and China. Realistically, how much more chance do they have to succeed this time? Also, what are the key regional countries, especially Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, saying about this?
Farhad, disagreements in the United Nations Security Council over the U.S. and Bahrain's recent draft resolution regarding the strategic Strait of Hormuz are still ongoing, and many observing countries are totally fed up with this frustrating inaction they're seeing from the Security Council due to the deep-seated differences among the 5 permanent members. Currently, it seems quite clear that the path to successfully adopting this critical resolution will not be easy at all. According to several inside diplomats who spoke recently, Russia and China strongly believe that the new text prepared by the United States and various Arab countries doesn't differ much from the core elements of the previous draft, which was notably vetoed by both Russia and China just a few short weeks ago. In fact, the specific language related to Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter remains one of the main points of contention among delegates, even though the new text doesn't directly refer to the use of military force and only mentions economic sanctions as one of the potential options to be raised. However, it seems that Russia and China also strongly emphasize that this current draft completely fails to address the main roots of the situation, namely why this crisis originally started in the Middle East, which, in the firm belief of Russia and China, traces the very beginning of these conflicts directly to Israel and the United States. Meanwhile, I am hearing from several high-ranking diplomats stationed here at the United Nations headquarters that the United States actually expects the anticipated vote on this critical resolution to take place early next week within the UN Security Council. The timing is particularly noteworthy, as all of this unfolds just as the Security Council held a highly sensitive meeting focused specifically on Iran earlier today. That crucial session, which officially concluded just about an hour ago, was held entirely behind closed doors to allow for candid discussions among member states. The primary focus of this urgent gathering centered on the deeply concerning recent attacks orchestrated by the Islamic Republic targeting the United Arab Emirates. Furthermore, delegates closely examined the increasingly fragile security situation in the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, a crucial artery for global energy supplies. Ultimately, international leaders expressed profound anxiety regarding the growing risk of rapidly escalating military conflicts, destabilizing the broader Middle Eastern region. In the firm belief of the UAE, the Islamic Republic's sole intention now is to deliberately escalate these ongoing tensions and draw the entire Middle East region into a broader conflict. This concerning overall goal is increasingly being raised by neighboring Arab countries. During this recent closed-door meeting, according to senior diplomats, Council members extensively discussed the critical importance of freedom of navigation. They reviewed recent attacks on commercial ships, as well as the dangerous mine-laying operations that the Islamic Republic has reportedly carried out in the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Consequently, the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz and the severe impact of its potential closure on global energy markets have also been thoroughly debated. But before the Security Council meeting started, we saw that the representatives of Bahrain and the UAE, among reporters, had a much harsher tone than before against the Islamic Republic, and they emphasized that the recent attacks by the Islamic Republic, especially on the UAE, are a direct threat to regional security and also to the global economy. The Bahraini representative said that the Islamic Republic's attacks demand a decisive and strict response from the international community, especially from the Security Council, which is currently caught up in a very major disagreement over these tensions between the US and Iran, and also Israel and many regional countries, especially those in the Persian Gulf, are putting pressure on them And it is important to recognize that it's not like this mounting pressure is only being placed on the Islamic Republic. Yes, the neighboring Gulf countries are indeed actively trying to exert the utmost diplomatic pressure on the Islamic Republic. But at the same exact time, there is also a tremendous amount of pressure falling on the US to decisively control this widening war and mitigate these regional tensions. In particular, allies excite Washington to urgently address the volatile security situation unfolding in the critical Strait of Hormuz. Let's hear part of the UAE representative's insightful remarks, which he just shared with us reporters gathered here.
The Security Council.
We are calling on the Security Council to react decisively to this violation committed by Iran and to ensure stability and security. The Council should better protect and preserve its decision and use all the tools at its disposal for this matter, and the Security Council cannot just be a forum for repeating statements while violations and these actions continue. If the Security Council doesn't act when its resolutions are violated, other actors will draw conclusions, and the credibility of this organization will be questioned.
Fardad, members of the international community, far beyond just the Security Council members, are deeply concerned that this war is rapidly escalating. Regional tensions are noticeably increasing daily, and the looming possibility that the United States might resume its attacks on the Islamic Republic if a diplomatic agreement fails is fueling even more anxiety here. Overall, global observers are anxiously waiting for the Security Council to take decisive action regarding this escalating tension in the Middle East, reach a unified consensus, and finally take a practical step forward.
Thank you, Mariam Rahmati from the United Nations in New York. We are pleased to welcome Ali Sadzadeh, a Middle East analyst, who has also joined us today from Frankfurt. Mr. Sadzadeh, the political rhetoric of the Persian Gulf countries, especially the United Arab Emirates, is becoming very harsh and confrontational against Tehran. In response, Tehran has adopted strikingly similar hostile rhetoric against the UAE. However, it is clear there isn't complete cohesion among the GCC countries. Which way do you think this escalating diplomatic process will ultimately go? There are signs that Saudi Arabia seems to have pulled back a bit, maybe even cooperating for a potential agreement with Iran. How much might this war highlight differences that were more or less visible in the GCC even before the war?
This shifting dynamic will undoubtedly become much more prominent on the global stage, and the UAE has apparently made its firm strategic decision moving forward. If you recall past diplomatic events, when the UAE left OPEC, the UAE's foreign minister and Anwar Gargash, who is widely considered the intellectual architect of UAE foreign policy, spoke quite candidly. They stated that they were deeply disappointed with the Gulf countries, that were already disillusioned with the broader Arab nations, and didn't harbor much hope for meaningful support from them. They had genuinely hoped that the neighboring Persian Gulf countries would show some effective political coordination, but as it ultimately turned out, they lacked that necessary coordination. The regional rivalries between these powerful nations are very historical and deeply entrenched. In fact, if you closely examine the broader international scene, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are operating in two completely different places, navigating two distinct geopolitical currents. For instance, in the devastating Sudanese civil war, they are actively backing opposing sides. Similarly, throughout the ongoing complex conflict in Yemen, they remain on opposing sides. Ultimately, they have practically separated their strategic paths from each other entirely. And even regarding Islamist regimes, they have different stances. You see, for example, Saudi Arabia's closeness to Ahmed al-Shara, while the United Arab Emirates is very, very cautious about Muslim Brotherhood issues and what constitutes political Islam, and has a very tough stance on the Muslim Brotherhood. On the other hand, what's very, very important is that the UAE has strategically moved towards Israel. I mean, you see that Israel has established Iron Dome systems there, even a laser Iron Dome, which it might not have given to any other country, but it gave it to the UAE. And it is important to know that almost all 4 of the dangerous rockets launched the day before yesterday were successfully intercepted by this advanced defense system that Israel recently provided.
Mr. Sanzada, we're short on time. I definitely want to ask you this, that I understand the regional rivalries between the UAE and Saudi Arabia in Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. But Riyadh's approach seems to have undergone a significant change because there were signs in the past few years that Saudi Arabia was more or less following the UAE's path, despite the rivalries. So what we're seeing now, like this closeness to Ahmed al-Shara and even anti-Israeli rhetoric in some Saudi media, shows a shift in approach.
That assessment is completely correct. The country certainly won't become like Qatar, meaning it will never take on that kind of highly active mediation role between the Islamic Republic and the US. But what is particularly interesting is that today, Mr. Aragachi spoke directly with the Saudi foreign minister by phone, and there appears to be more or less a growing consensus between the two nations. They both want to adopt a unified common policy within OPEC to stabilize energy markets, while the UAE has left OPEC. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia is gradually distancing itself from its previous much-discussed plan, which was to quickly join the Abraham Accords and normalize ties. Perhaps Saudi Arabia's primary concern is that the current Netanyahu government is failing to demonstrate any meaningful diplomatic closeness toward the Palestinians, specifically toward leader Mahmoud Abbas. For Riyadh, tangible progress on a viable two-state solution remains a crucial prerequisite before it can officially establish normalized relations with Israel. Conversely, the United Arab Emirates operates with different geopolitical priorities. The UAE views Abbas with deep suspicion, perceiving a lingering Muslim Brotherhood influence within his administration, whereas Saudi Arabia simply does not share this specific ideological concern.
Thank you, Ali Sadzadeh, Middle East analyst from Frankfurt. With escalating tensions in the region, international efforts to ensure the security of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz have intensified. France, in coordination with Britain, has dispatched the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier strike group towards the Gulf of Aden to prepare for a potential mission in support of freedom of navigation. Meanwhile, an attack on a French ship in the Strait of Hormuz and the wounding of several crew members have heightened concerns about the security of this vital waterway. Captain Nasser Maimond, former commander of the Imperial Iranian Navy's submarine squadron, has joined us from Dallas, Texas. Thank you, Captain Maimond. How much of a meaningful role do you really think Europeans can play? Because, during this war, they seem to try to be very cautious. Do you think France and Britain can play a role now in opening up these vital straits?
Mr. Farzad, thank you very much for your invitation to join you today. I am happy to be at your service, and we will talk about these complex regional issues together. In my opinion, if you allow me to speak frankly, the global community urgently needs to clarify its definitive stance regarding the Islamic Republic. Inside Iran, the Islamic Republic has deliberately created a grim situation characterized by the tragic daily executions of innocent young people. It ruthlessly uses this immense terror to completely silence its political opponents and any dissenting voices. Considering the severe instability and numerous conflicts it has engineered throughout the region simply for its own survival, the Islamic Republic faces a critical matter of life and death, of either desperately holding on to power or being rightfully thrown into the dustbin of history. The world needs to clarify its stance and stop negotiating with this regime. Therefore, if we might soon witness new surprises being created for us, and that is right now it's launching missiles at 5 Arab countries in the region. The day after tomorrow, if the Islamic Republic isn't stopped, we'll have a government, a system similar to North Korea. North Korea's issue right now is South Korea. But if the Islamic Republic remains for its own survival, it will set the entire world, the region, on fire. Therefore, the issue that a few ships were attacked today, a few drones came, and it was all America's, that's a very temporary issue. And until the world doesn't recognize its job, that it wants to remain with the Islamic Republic, and, tries and endeavors to continue these negotiations. In a meeting I had with Mr. Trump, President Trump, just last week, I told him exactly where things stand. I said the Islamic Republic remains a critical threat. He was asking me, how's my block? I brought up another issue, but I firmly said, Mr. Trump, you should absolutely continue your work. Just keep going, keep going. The world urgently needs a completely different view regarding the daily analyses that constantly distract us. So what if a few of our ships were targeted, a few arsenals were destroyed, and a few missiles were set? We need to stop getting sidelined and return to the main point, the overarching issue of the Islamic Republic. Can we witness and observe this terrorist regime remain in the region? For 47 years, the world has witnessed and observed all the inhumane actions of this regime. And, right now, Mr. Farzad, the media also needs to have a bit of a new perspective on the events that have happened, the international issues that have emerged, the world being in danger. We need to have a new perspective. Therefore, I think if we genuinely want to clarify our stance more effectively, we must observe recent shifts. Mr. Macron actually sent his number today. America is essentially supposed to, gradually reduce its strategic presence of it. In any case, our absolute main focus should undoubtedly be the Iranian nation, the devastating crimes that happen every single day, and the tragic continuations that occur daily. And concerning the very complex regional issues that are happening, Russia and China too, I think, clearly have vested interests in this regard that actively help continue this ongoing work.
You mentioned overthrowing the Islamic Republic, Captain Maynard. Doesn't it seem that the United States and Israel, at least in the very initial stages of the conflict, perhaps had such an intention? This is especially true considering they didn't just target standard military objectives. There were clear political objectives too. They even killed the leader of the Islamic Republic. But increasingly, it seems that the Islamic Republic has a higher resilience than many observers expected. This is evident both against domestic protesters, whom it killed by the thousands upon thousands with unbridled violence, and in confronting the United States and Israel, which made the war super-regional and dragged other countries into it. Ultimately, it seems everyone now realizes that the Islamic Republic cannot be removed so easily, or with a moderate cost. America might be able to do such a thing by bringing in ground forces, but the big question is, are they willing to pay such a cost?
You asked a very interesting and relevant question. I think America had made some critical mistakes in its initial military assessments, which I believe they have thoroughly reevaluated now. Secondly, European countries, which also have significant economic interests in this complex situation, didn't cooperate at all, so to speak, with the US government and the Trump administration. I think if there is genuinely, so to speak, an international sense of shared responsibility, more collective action is required. Right now, Europeans, Japan, and, China are all suffering heavily from the ongoing issues in the Strait of Hormuz. If these global powers truly have vested interests, they should also actively help in rejecting evil. I think that if an international consensus is formed against this regime that lives by terror and horror and has made life forbidden for the people of Iran and has brought this international situation to this stage, in any case, if there is an international consensus, I think removing the Islamic Republic from the scene of time will be much easier.
Thank you, Captain Nasser Maymond, former commander of the Imperial Iranian Navy's submarine squadron from Dallas, Texas.
Thank you.
The Washington Post says Iran's attacks, thank you. The Washington Post says Iran's attacks on U.S. bases in the Middle East were more severe than previously announced. The Washington Post wrote that based on satellite images, at least 228 U.S. military positions in countries like Kuwait, Qatar, and Iraq were damaged, and aircraft hangars, field depots, and radar systems were among these targets. This report states that over 400 American military personnel were injured in these attacks, with at least 12 of them having severe injuries, and 7 were also killed. Farzin Nadimi, a senior research fellow for defense and security affairs at the Washington Institute, has joined us from this very city. Mr. Nadimi, these satellite images are really telling. Could you give us a bit more precise picture of how it is that the strongest army of a superpower country, like the United States of America, can't even meaningfully defend its own bases against the Islamic Republic, even defensively?
Well, of course, it's certainly not surprising because America currently maintains like 15 or 16 military bases scattered entirely around Iran. Furthermore, these strategic outposts are situated dangerously close to Iran's sophisticated missile and drone launch centers, naturally continuously defending this many vulnerable bases against potential regional threats over a significant period of time. Well, it's simply not a very easy task, considering that America, during the intense 12-day war, almost lost a significant number of its critical interceptor missiles. Their defense defenses were heavily strained in this very conflict, they also used up nearly half of the highly valued THAAD and Patriot interceptor missiles that were left over from the prior summer war. Consequently, military strategists probably had to do some difficult calculations about exactly which key bases to defend better. Regarding other installations, well, since many of them had already been safely evacuated and frontline troops pulled back, they figured they should just leave them be. So we naturally see that some specific places might have significantly more damage. On the other hand, Iran, or rather the Revolutionary Guard and regular army forces, paid significantly more strategic attention to two specific countries, America's military base in Kuwait and its facilities in Bahrain. This occurred because, well, Bahrain served as the primary operational center of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. As a direct result, that vital support center for the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Manama received the absolute highest number of incoming Iranian missiles and armed drones, ultimately sustaining the most severe damage. After that, it was Kuwait. From Kuwait and Bahrain, offensive attacks were launched. They were the only countries in the region from which offensive attacks against Iranian soil were carried out. That's probably why a significant number of attacks were directed there. And anyway, we saw that the logistical bases in the region, in Saudi Arabia, like suddenly, several times they attacked Krent Sultan Air Base, where American planes are, and they got damaged, especially in AWACS. Well, of course, in one sense, the US, the Pentagon, CENTCOM couldn't provide the defense that many of its important logistical bases deserved. In wartime conditions, many of the facilities, installations and structures weren't very strong. They didn't have good structural integrity. And also, as I mentioned, air defense wasn't very strong in some cases either. It was because of the large number of these bases in the region, and also maybe, to some extent, they had underestimated the threat from Iran, and didn't think that Iranian missiles would be so accurate, that Iranian drones would be so accurate. Of course, at the highest intelligence levels, anyway, this critical information is readily available, so it wasn't really surprising to the analysts. But maybe somewhere in that complex chain of command, they couldn't adequately prioritize these things, because they simply didn't think that to this extraordinary extent, these Iranian attacks would continue to sustain their command and control systems' impressive resilience. They did not anticipate the ongoing coordinated missile and drone launches over a prolonged period of time, or that their accuracy would still be strictly maintained so they could hit their targets with such high precision. We saw that vital THAAD radars were attacked several times. The resulting impacts were very precise. And also, for the first time in the history of this prolonged war, Iran had unprecedented access to online and real-time satellite data provided directly from China. Well, they could leverage this continuous stream of high-resolution data very quickly and efficiently for the precise targeting of moving objectives. This included critical military assets like fighter planes that could move unpredictably on runways or reposition themselves on the operational ramps of an airbase. But overall, beyond just these dynamic targets, Iran already possessed highly precise and comprehensive information about heavily fortified fixed sites and strategic targets. Over the years, the nation had systematically managed to maintain, complete, and consistently update its own extensive intelligence database well, and effectively use it in combat scenarios. Consequently, it appears that CENTCOM and the Pentagon probably somewhat underestimated the growing capability of Iran's coordinated missile and drone attacks on their strategic targets, as well as the sheer accuracy of those advanced strikes.
Well, the geographical locations of these bases aren't like that mysterious. Anyone can find them, even with open source data. If, from a defensive standpoint, the THAAD and Patriot systems and other systems that the Americans had really can't defend these bases against the Islamic Republic, whose defense budget is like 1/100th of many other countries, like China and Russia, even defend themselves, then what's the point of having these bases in the region at all? What advantage do they give to America and its allies?
Well, anyway, this is one of the discussions out there. When these bases can't defend themselves like this and get damaged in such a way that billions of dollars have to be spent on rebuilding them, is it really right to rebuild them and put them in a vulnerable position again? Probably many of these bases might not be rebuilt anymore, and personnel won't return to these bases in large numbers in the same way as before. Certainly, there will be a review of the deployment of American forces and facilities in the region. They'll probably, maybe, also learn lessons in the future about wars in other regions against China. But unfortunately, when an organization is really big, it absorbs lessons a bit slowly. We saw what the Ukrainians did to the Russians in Ukraine, and at that very time, there was this concern. Would America really, truly learn from these lessons? And we saw that the AWACS plane, every time it landed at that base, it would be positioned in exactly the same spot. Well, naturally, when certain behavior gets less attention or becomes very normalized over time, those actions become highly predictable. Consequently, adversaries can easily analyze these routine behavioral patterns and use them for precise targeting, naturally. But anyway, this exact scenario is what happened throughout this recent war, and they genuinely hope that crucial strategic lessons can be learned from it moving forward.
Thank you, Farzin Nadini, Senior Research Fellow for Defense and Security Affairs, and thank you for watching tonight's 24 program.